Berserk is a manga and anime series that needs little introduction, and if someone were to ask me what 10 animes and or mangas best define the medium, best show the exemplary heights of storytelling, art, and pathos, well, Berserk would certainly be on that list without any question. It's no secret that series creator Kentaro Miura is not only a master of his craft, but one that has held the attention, emotions, and thoughts of manga readers for literally over the span of decades, creating his masterpiece. However, this video isn't all about gushing over Berserk. No, rather, today I want to go over what I consider to be the most powerful theme and the most important piece that makes Berserk such an amazing story. That being Berserk's philosophy of fate, and how it connects to the characters Guts and Griffith. Before we dive in, perhaps it's best to actually define fate. Something that unavoidably befalls a person, fortune, lot. The universal principle, or ultimate agency, by which the order of things is presumably prescribed. Time. That which is inevitably predetermined. Destiny. A prophetic declaration of what must be. Death, destruction, or ruin. Something important about the concept of fate that rings true in these definitions is that it really has two meanings, one of theory and the other of fact. One can theorize about the true meaning of fate, if there is truly an ultimate agency that guides us towards a predetermined result. However, what's not so debatable is that one word, death. If fate exists, surely that must be the ultimate destination. Thus, in death, we all share fate, and thusly, we all share time. What does this all have to do with Berserk, you may ask? Well, beyond Berserk being entangled in these themes, questions over fate and causality, and the truth in its power, one event as predetermined as death is upon the mortal man, there is an event that ties these characters together. The eclipse. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. Firstly, let's look at how fate, on an individual level, helps shape our most important characters, Guts and Griffith. Guts is one of the greatest protagonists I have ever had the pleasure of knowing, and that goes beyond just its medium. Guts is not only deeply layered, but is ultimately very human. But perhaps a full character analysis of his is due another day. However, what is important to note is that from birth, Guts has had the claws of fate coiled around his neck. Guts was born beneath the corpse of his mother, hung from the gallows tree. This image is utterly tragic, and all the same time is symbolic of Guts perhaps more than any other image. A child born from the dead, and found by a group of bandits to train him with the way of the sword, as well as abuse him until the day he came to walk on his own. It's fair to say that from birth, Guts had escaped his fate, death. This first moment, along with the life he would end up enduring as a child, are what helped to define Guts as a character, both emotionally and philosophically. Guts sees the world through the narrow lens of pure survival, working as a mercenary for years, job to job, loyal to truly no one, trusting no one, and believing that only the strong deserve to live. It's easy to understand that those who see life through the thin and narrow often would see fate as not just absolute, but essential to their very existence. That is, until the day he met Griffith. I'll go into more detail about Griffith's side in a moment, but for the sake of order, I want to look at Guts' perspective of Griffith. It's important to note the visual storytelling that can be seen through the comparison of these two characters, which over the course of the manga only grows into a greater divide. Guts is a tall, dark, and brooding character. His hair is short and black. He has a hulking build and a stern gaze. From the outside perspective, he looks like a brute, a dark warrior, or even what one may call a villain if you knew nothing about him. Guts' appearance is also that of masculinity and virility, in stark contrast to Griffith, who is a very feminine, very woman-like in his appearance. From his long, white hair, pale skin, and determined yet almost friendly gaze, Griffith has all the makings of what many would traditionally see as a hero, a knight in white shining armor. Be noted that while Guts, even if he is a badass, is very much a man of his world, he fits right in alongside the other ruthless mercenaries and brutes of the world. While Griffith, both in perspective of Guts, the Band of the Hawk, and the reader, stands out. In a world of bloody, brutish men, Griffith is a clean, well-kept man. This will come into play more as we go into Griffith's side, but what is discernible is once Griffith beats Guts in a sword duel, and the two grow to become friends over the next few years of working alongside each other as mercenaries, Guts changes fundamentally as a character, or at least he thinks he does, the Band of the Hawk becoming something he never truly had, a family. All this is well and good, until the moment that is one of the most well-written, multi-layered, and story-changing conversations in the entire series.
I think you're amazing. I'm sure your friends are equally fascinated by you. I'm certain it's what attracts them to you.
They are my soldiers, and they will follow me into the jaws of death for the sake of my dream. But it doesn't make them my friends. A friend should never subsist on another's dream. The man who would be my friend must have a reason for living that goes beyond me. And he should put his heart and soul into protecting this dream, even if it means opposing me. For me to call a man my friend, he must be my equal in every respect.
This moment, when Guts hears what Griffith's true vision of what a friend is by his definition, Guts now has a fundamental issue. Guts has no dream. While Griffith is full of dreams, every action he takes determined, Guts, in contrast, has only ever followed, and even in the time he stood on his own, he had no dreams, no ambitions, no reason for fighting. All he had was survival. While this scene has a lot of layers, we will be coming back to it in a minute. And yes, I do promise to stop saying that, by the way. This does lead Guts down a road of thought, trying to find meaning in his life, in his actions, what his purpose truly is. These are things he had never considered before, perhaps never had the privilege to ponder. And in this way, we can see the tragedy in Guts' character. We can see that fate, in the form of time, has been all that has ever led Guts. Never has he made a decision for himself outside of basic survival. In contrast to Griffith, who has meaning to every action he takes, even willing to risk his own survival in these actions. This search for meaning and for admiration from the only friend he has ever known, Guts eventually comes to leave the Band of the Hawk, much to the anger and shock of Griffith. Guts leaving so that he may one day return once he has found meaning, and found his dream, something worth fighting for. This, ironically, is exactly what Griffith said he wanted out of a friend. But as I said before, everything he says has layers. And speaking of layers, before we go further onward to the eclipse, let's twist the perspective the other way around, toward Griffith. Griffith is one of the most complex characters I have ever known. It's undeniable that this character is so well written that even in the face of some of the most unforgivable actions, Griffith is a character you simply cannot take your eyes off of. Much like the Band of the Hawk and Guts himself, the reader can't help but be at least a little bit enamored. If you were to look to Griffith's past like we did with Guts, one finds something interesting, as even at a young age, Griffith had a dream, to have a kingdom of his own, to be a king. It's a dream that he later shares with Guts, and rightfully so shocks Guts, as such a dream seems childish if you think about it. It's the likes of a child saying he wants to be king of the world and give everyone free ice cream, ignorant of how the world works around them. And yet Griffith says it with such conviction that you can't help but be swept up in it. To have such an innocent yet ultimate dream seems foreign to not only Guts, but to the rest of the Band of the Hawk, as they know their place in this society. But it's not just the dream that causes them to follow. It's the fact that everything Griffith does is deliberate, confident, and heroic, to the point where, to men who had nothing to live for, Griffith gave them meaning. It's rather ironic, actually, that Griffith says that he only views a true friend as someone with their own dreams, and who might oppose him when the Band of the Hawk is truly a tribute to him. Calling it the Band of Griffith, for instance, gives it the exact same meaning. These men have no dreams, but through Griffith, they all share one, his childish dream that perhaps they all wish they had the guts to share by themselves. In some ways, it could be argued that in a world as harsh and unwaveringly violent of that of Berserks, Griffith stands out as a ray of innocent hope, a different way of thinking. For this reason, he casts aside the ties of fate, such as social status, upbringing, and the government. All these aspects of birth in this world, the royal stay royal and the poor keep poor. Griffith is a man who chooses his own fate. Many have even compared him to a sort of messiah figure, him playing the role of a Jesus and his Band of the Hawk being his disciples. However, we all know things ended up a little bit differently, and I will refrain from using that comparison again. The most powerful image of this philosophy he has held is saving Casca. In the midst of her being raped as a child, he saves her, but then simply watches. He taught Casca that if she wants to live, she can't depend on others. You have to take your sword and enact your own fate. Thus, before we move on into the eclipse, we must understand that Guts is a man who is bound by the chains of fate, to the point of being meaningless, whereas Griffith is a man whom has cast his chains aside, to the point of an almost childlike innocence. If you're familiar with Berserk, and especially if you're a longtime fan like I am, you know how important the eclipse is toward the entirety of the story. For the sake of time, I will assume that you know what takes place during this event, and instead, let's look at the choices that both Guts and Griffith have made up until now. When Guts left, Griffith was angry, heartbroken, and for one of the first times in his life, felt truly low. This all leads into Griffith having sex with Princess Charlotte. It's in this action that reveals the darkness that lies deep within him, the side we might have only caught a glimmer of before. In this act, while deliberate, it's the only action he has ever taken against his dream, and thusly is made completely out of emotion. A need to feel powerful again after Guts left his band. The great tragic irony of it all is Guts has done exactly what Griffith always said a friend to be, but in truth, Griffith never truly meant those words. All his need for dominance over others and possessing them conflicts with these words. It's only years after that, after Griffith has been punished and tortured for this act, that he would later come to understand where he went wrong. His dream. He failed because he grew to care for Guts, and acted out because of him. When this all comes to a head, it's notable how pathetic Griffith is at this point. The powerful, talented, optimistic, childish dreamer, all that was now broken. Much the same way as his body, he was a husk of his former self. And in what can only be described as one of the most powerful character moments I've ever seen. Broken still, Griffith still wants to pursue his dream. This is what will define the transformation we come to know, as Griffith tries to commit suicide. Fate, the very thing he always cast aside, gifts him with the bayonet, the same given to him as a child, the egg of the king, a sort of little funny note of sorts, something that was almost ironic that he had before. Perhaps he had seen it as just a bit of good luck, but as fate would turn out, he himself had always been following the fate that was made for him. If we look at these characters, we can see it was truly inevitable that when Griffith is given the choice between being able to fulfill his dream and become a god in exchange for the souls of his beloved followers, his only friend Guts, and the entirety of the Band of the Hawk, there was ever only one choice. One as fated as death. I suppose most of us know what happens next, but what's interesting is how everything connects in this moment. Guts is branded with the mark of a sacrifice, like the others, for Griffith to ascend to godhood, but after one of the most brutal and awful YouTube banning set of scenes put on the pages of a manga or the frames of an anime, Guts and Casca escaped their fate. An inevitable fate. An ultimate one. And now the tables have been turned. Griffith is now a man bound by the chains of fate. One could only guess what would be if he had chosen to stand beside his comrades in death. But in truth, even in his fate, it always was the most important act during the whole event, is that choice. As powerful as the God Hand seems to be, in that choice they reveal a weakness. After all, they were all once men and women, turned demons through that same choice. How much power does the God Hand truly have over the will of man? What happens if someone were to say no? One could even interpret the God Hand demons trying to mock and replicate God, fate and causality, death being the ultimate power over others, yet still is weak, meaningless towards perhaps the one thing more powerful than fate, free will. In truth, I think this is also an interesting, the same way Griffith once represents the knight in white shining armor, he also represents the chosen one archetype. Be it chosen by a prophecy, God, circumstance, or the hands of fate, the chosen one is a character we often see in literature. Berserk shows the inherent, scary darkness that comes from that, however. After all, if a man is fated to be evil, could he ever be good? In this we reveal the strength in Guts, and the weakness in Griffith. Like Griffith, Guts has changed too. He's now a man who lives with the mark of a sacrifice. He went against his fate, and now lives. It's here that we see a parallel to his birth, that even with all his suffering and pain, he has continued to escape fate, his own death, even the one fated by the very strings of causality itself. Thus Guts, despite how easy it would be, after all his suffering, to accept his fate and die, he never did. He never gave up, not even in the face of the God Hand. Whereas Griffith, in his moment of ultimate weakness, was ready to kill himself, give up, and in the hand of fate, literally gives in and sacrifices his band. So then, what does this all mean? The ultimate philosophy of Berserk is muddled only by the fact that it's, well, not finished. But we can still look at the story that we have before us, and we can see that fate is a powerful force in Berserk, changing the very fabric of their world, literally bringing about demons, monsters, and dragons to reality, turning man into God. And yet hidden under the loftiness of Griffith and the God Hand, we see a power that seems to not only defy fate, but destroy it. Free will. Its only flaw is that it's a heavy sword to wield. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. And for a question, I suppose, what are some examples of deeply well-written characters like Guts and Griffith that you enjoy, and what characters about them do you find the most admirable or interesting or disgusting? So, until next time, this is Dylan the Night Owl, flying off. 「